The dog wasn't supposed to survive the night. That was what the vet tech had said when she called the Whistler detachment at 11:30 on a Tuesday in late October. A male shepherd mix, maybe 8 weeks old, found in a drainage ditch off the Sea to Sky highway with a broken front leg and a body temperature so low the thermometer barely registered. She said she'd done what she could. She said the rest was up to the dog. Deputy Sergeant Lorne Mackay took the call at his desk, wrote the details on a post-it note, and stuck it to the edge of his monitor, where it stayed for 3 days. He wasn't known for being unkind. He was known for being precise. There was a difference, and Lorne understood it the way he understood most things, quietly, completely, without ever needing to say it out loud. 31 years in uniform, 6 years with Joint Task Force 2 before his knees, and something else, something without a name, brought him back to civilian policing in British Columbia. He ran a tight detachment. His officers showed up on time, filed clean reports, and didn't ask him questions he hadn't invited. Nobody asked him why the post-it stayed on the monitor. He was 54 years old. He lived alone in a cedar-sided house on Alta Lake Road that his wife Pauline had picked out because she loved the way the mountains looked in January, when the snow sat heavy on the peaks and the lake went still and silver. Pauline had been gone for 3 years. The mountains still looked the same in January. Lorne had stopped checking. The morning after the dog was brought in, he drove past the animal hospital on his way to work without stopping. He did the same thing the morning after that. On the third morning, a Friday, he pulled into the parking lot, sat in the truck for 4 minutes with the engine running, and then went inside. The vet tech, her name was Simone, early 30s, the kind of tired that comes from caring about things that can't tell you thank you, brought the puppy out in a blue fleece blanket. The dog's front leg was wrapped in a bright orange splint. One of his ears stood up properly, the other folded over at the tip like it hadn't gotten the instructions yet. He was looking at Lorne with the absolute certainty of something that had never been taught to be afraid. He made it, Simone said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she was still mildly astonished. Lorne looked at the dog looked at Lorne. "He need anything special?" Quiet, warmth, soft food for a while. "And someone to be there." She paused. "He doesn't do well alone. We found that out the first night." Lorne said he understood, signed the paperwork, and carried the dog to his truck in the blue fleece blanket. He named him Copper, which was what the leaves had looked like the morning Pauline was buried, the whole hillside gone orange and red and brown, and Lorne standing at the graveside, thinking that she would have found it beautiful, and he couldn't find anything at all. The detachment was small. 9 officers, 1 civilian admin coordinator named Faye, who had been there longer than any of them, and a coffee maker that Faye had brought from home because the departmental one made coffee that tasted like regret. Whistler was tourist country. Ski season, bike season, the long, slow shoulder between them, which meant the calls were mostly fender benders on the highway, noise complaints from vacation rentals, and the occasional thing that reminded you the wilderness didn't care about the season at all. Lorne had come there after Pauline died. He'd requested the transfer himself, told the superintendent it was about the caseload, which was partly true. Mostly it was about not being in the apartment in Ottawa, where Pauline's reading glasses were still on the nightstand, and he kept almost calling her name when he heard something on the radio she would have liked. He brought Copper to the detachment the Monday after he took him in. He hadn't planned to. He'd driven to work, gotten halfway there, and realized he'd spent the entire drive with one hand on the steering wheel, and one hand resting on the passenger seat where Copper had fallen asleep with his chin on Lorne's forearm. The dog had stayed like that for 40 minutes. Lorne had driven slower than usual. He left Copper in the truck for the first hour. Then it started to rain, a cold, hard October rain off the mountains, and he went back and got him. He carried Copper inside in the blue blanket. The dog seemed to regard the blanket as a permanent fixture now, a part of his situation, and set him down on the floor beside his desk. Faye looked up from her computer. She looked at Lorne. She looked at the dog. She said nothing, which was one of the many things Lorne had always appreciated about Faye. Constable Yusuf Hargreaves, who was 28, and had recently gotten a tattoo on his forearm that he kept trying to decide whether to tell people about, leaned around the partition and said, "Is that a dog?" Lorne said yes. Are we allowed to have a dog in here? Lorne looked at him for a moment. Yusuf? Yes, sir. Go run your patrol. Yusuf went to run his patrol. Copper spent the morning sleeping under the desk. He woke up occasionally to look around, assess the situation, and make a sound that was somewhere between a grunt and a question, not quite a bark, not quite a whine, something in between two that seemed to be directed at no one in particular. Lorne ignored it the first time. The second time he looked down and found Copper staring at him with enormous amber eyes, the folded ear giving him an expression of such profound inquiry that Lorne felt, briefly and against his will, the urge to explain himself. He didn't. By noon, Copper had relocated himself to the middle of the floor and was making the sound again, louder now, with more commitment. Faye came around with a cup of coffee, looked at the dog and said, "He's talking to you." "He's a dog," Lorne said. "He's a dog who has opinions." Faye said, "And I've been working here long enough to know you're not going to win." She was right. By 2 in the afternoon, Copper had conducted a full audit of the detachment, sniffed every doorframe, investigated the corner where someone had left a pair of rubber boots, stationed himself briefly in front of the empty locker that had belonged to an officer who'd transferred out in the spring, and then returned to Lorne's desk and begun talking again. Not barking. Talking. A low, rolling sequence of sounds that rose and fell like he was making a point and waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Yusuf came in from his patrol, shook the rain off his jacket, and stopped dead in the doorway. "It's still making that sound." Lorne said without looking up. "He's still making that sound." "Yes. Does he do that all the time?" Lorne considered. The dog had been in his house for 3 days. In 3 days, Copper had talked to the kettle, to the window that looked out on the lake, to the particular armchair that had been Pauline's and that Lorne had never gotten rid of and never sat in. He'd talked to the mountains, or at least to the view of the mountains, standing at the sliding door with his splinted legs slightly raised, and issuing what seemed to be a considered assessment of the entire landscape. "Yes," Lorne said, "more or less." Yusuf sat down at his desk. After a moment he said quieter, "My gran had a dog like that. Beagle. Talked constantly, drove my dad mental." He paused. "She used to say he was just trying to figure out if everyone was okay." Lorne didn't respond. He turned back to his report, but he reached down and put his hand on Copper's back, and the talking stopped for a while. There were 3 people in the detachment who Lorne worried about, in the way that a person who had commanded others for 3 decades worried. Silently, specifically, and without any of them knowing it. The first was Yusuf, who was good at his job and deeply uncertain about whether being good at it was enough, and who had filed 2 incident reports in the last month that Lorne had read 3 times each because the writing in them was careful in a way that suggested something had happened that wasn't in the report. The second was Constable Mira Ostergaard, who was 35 and had come to Whistler from a detachment in Winnipeg that Lorne knew, from channels he'd never specified, had had a bad year. She was meticulous and competent, and she ate lunch at her desk every single day, and never once asked anyone to eat with her. The third was Staff Sergeant Owen Price, who was Lorne's second-in-command, and who had been dealing with a divorce for 8 months that he mentioned only to say, each time it came up, that it was going fine. Owen was 51. He jogged every morning at 5:30. He brought in baked goods on Fridays with an energy that Lorne recognized as the particular brightness of someone who has decided to be fine and is working very hard at it. Lorne had spent his career making decisions that got people home alive. He had not always known how to look at the people who came home and notice what they'd left behind. That was something he'd learned from Pauline, who had a way of seeing what people were carrying that she'd never been able to teach him except by example. He was still learning. Copper, it turned out, had no trouble at all. The first week, the dog identified Yusuf as a person of interest and began following him with a persistence that was almost professional. Yusuf would come in, and Copper would cross the room and sit beside him and begin the low, rumbling commentary that he seemed to use when he felt something needed to be said. Yusuf would look down at him and then look away, and then, inevitably, look back. "What do you want?" he'd say. Copper would continue his report. One afternoon, Lorne came back from a meeting to find Yusuf sitting on the floor beside his desk with Copper in his lap. A 70% successful operation. given the size of the dog versus the size of the man's lap, talking quietly. Not to anyone, just talking. About a call he'd run 2 weeks ago, a kid on the highway overpass, and how the kid had been okay in the end, but Yusuf had sat in his car afterward for 20 minutes unable to start the engine. I kept thinking about his shoes, Yusuf was saying. He had one shoe on and one shoe off, and I kept thinking about that. I don't know why. Copper's ear was folded. He was listening with the whole of his small body. Lorne went back around the corner and filed a different report, and arranged, quietly, to get Yusuf an appointment with the peer support coordinator in Vancouver, without telling Yusuf it was coming. 2 weeks later, Yusuf thanked him for it, in the hallway, quickly, without meeting his eyes. Lorne said it was standard. Yusuf said it had helped. Lorne said he was glad, and then they both went back to what they were doing, because that was how it worked here. Mira was different. She didn't warm to people or dogs on any observable schedule. She was polite, effective, and completely sealed. In 11 weeks at the detachment, she had contributed 3 observations to the staff meeting, all of them accurate and well-phrased, and had not stayed for coffee afterward once. Copper spent the first week watching her from across the room. He would track her movements with the same fixed attention he'd given the mountains from Lorne's back window. Not aggressive, not anxious, just looking, the way something looks when it's trying to understand. On a Thursday in the 3rd week, Mira had a call, a family's dog. A 3-year-old shepherd mix, not unlike Copper, though twice the size and no longer technically alive by the time Mira reached the scene, had been struck on the highway. The family's youngest, a girl of about 7, had been with the dog. Mira had managed the situation correctly in every procedural sense and had filed a clean report by end of shift. She had used the word contained 3 times in 6 sentences. Lorne read the report and then read the line about the girl again. The next morning, Mira came in 15 minutes early, which she never did, and stood at the cough maker for a long time before she realized she hadn't pressed the button. She pressed it. She stood there. Copper came out from under the desk. He crossed the room at the careful 3-legged gait he still used when he wasn't paying attention to the splint, and he stopped beside Mira and made the sound. Not the question sound. Something else, lower, quieter, more like a statement. Mira looked down at him. She said, "I know," and then she crouched down and put her face against the side of his neck and stayed there for almost a minute while the coffee maker finished doing its work. Copper didn't move. He made the sound once more, very softly, and then was still. When Mira stood up, her face was composed. She poured 2 coffees and brought one to Lorne's desk and set it down without saying anything. Lorne said thank you. She nodded and went to her desk. Neither of them mentioned it. But the next Friday, she stayed for coffee after the staff meeting, and the Friday after that, she started eating lunch at the table by the window, and after about a week Yusuf started sitting there too, and after another week it had become, without any announcement, the place where people ate lunch at the Whistler detachment. Lorne watched this happen from his desk and said nothing about it, which was its own kind of saying something. Owen was the hardest one. Owen had the Friday baking and the 5:30 jogging and the going fine and an entire architecture of fineness that he'd built so carefully that Lorne suspected Owen himself had lost track of what was underneath it. The thing about people who are very practiced at being fine is that they have usually decided at some specific moment that the alternative is not survivable. Owen had made a decision somewhere along the way, and Lorne could not see the seam of it, which meant he could not find the door. Copper spent the first month leaving Owen alone. This was itself unusual. Copper had opinions about most people within 48 hours, and Lorne had noticed it without knowing what to do with it. Then one evening in late November, Lorne stayed late to finish a report, and Owen was still there too, at his desk, staring at something on his screen that was not, based on his stillness, anything on his screen at all. The detachment was empty except for the 2 of them. Outside, the first real snow of the season had started, heavy, slow, the kind that settled and stayed. Copper was lying under Lorne's desk. He had been asleep. Then, without any visible stimulus, he woke up, walked across the room, and lay down beside Owen's chair. Owen looked down. He looked at the dog for a long time. Then he said to nobody in particular, "Yeah, I know, buddy." He was quiet for a while. Copper put his chin on Owen's foot. My daughter's not talking to me, Owen said finally. He said it to the floor. I thought when the divorce was done she'd understand. But she's 18 and she blames me, and maybe she's right. He stopped. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I know how to do this. He gestured vaguely at the office. This I know, the rest of it. He stopped again. Copper made the sound, the quiet one. Owen let out a long breath. I need to call her. I keep drafting the call in my head and then not making it. Lorne did not move from his desk. He had learned. It had taken him years, and Pauline, and a lot of standing in the wrong doorway at the wrong time, that there were moments when being witnessed was the whole of what was needed, and any motion toward the thing would disturb it. Owen sat there for another few minutes. Then he picked up his personal phone. He looked at it. He put it back down. I'll call her this weekend, he said, to Copper. Copper didn't say anything. I will, Owen said. I mean it. He scratched behind Copper's ear, the good ear, the upright one, and then shut down his computer and got his jacket and said goodnight to Lorne, who said goodnight back. The door closed. The snow kept coming down. Copper came back to Lorne's desk and looked up at him. I know, Lorne said. He didn't talk to Pauline. That was the thing people assumed, or the thing they said when they were trying to help, that he must talk to her, that it must help, that people who are gone stay present if you keep the conversation going. Lorne had tried it once, early on, standing at the kitchen counter at 7 in the morning, with a cup of coffee and the particular quality of silence that had moved in when she died. He'd said her name, and then he'd stood there, and there was nothing. Not peace, not presence, not anything except the kitchen and the silence and the coffee going cold. He didn't try it again. What he did instead was look at the mountains. He drove the highway. He worked the long shifts and read the clean reports, and carried the weight of knowing what his people were carrying, quietly, the way he carried everything. He had not cried at Pauline's funeral. He had not cried in the 2 years since. He had stood at her grave in the October, cold with the copper-colored leaves coming down, and felt something that didn't have a shape, and he had gone home, and he had kept going. He was good at keeping going. He did not know if this was a strength. On the 1st of December, a Tuesday, Lorne was at his desk at 6 in the morning. He did this sometimes. Came in early when the house felt too much like a house. He had a file open. He was not reading it. Copper came out from under the desk and put his front paws up on Lorne's knee, still careful of the splint which was coming off in 2 weeks, but testing the new weight on the leg, and made the sound. The question sound. Then he just looked at Lorne with those amber eyes, the folded ear, the steady absolute attention of something that has decided you are worth watching. What? Lorne said. Copper continued to look at him. I'm fine. The dog tilted his head. Lorne looked out the window. The lake was out there somewhere beyond the snow, still and dark under the early sky. Pauline had loved the lake in winter. She'd said once that it looked like the world holding its breath, and Lorne had said that wasn't exactly a comforting image, and she'd laughed and said comfort wasn't the point. He had not thought about that conversation in 2 years. It surfaced now, fully formed. Her voice, the way she'd laughed, the specific afternoon light in the kitchen where they'd been standing. He hadn't kept it, hadn't put it anywhere. It had just come back. He sat very still. Copper made the sound. Lorne reached out and put his hand on the dog's back. He felt the warmth of him, the slight rise and fall of his breathing. Outside, the sky was getting pale at the edges. The lake was beginning to appear. She would have liked you, he said. It was the first time he'd said anything like that. To anyone. He had not meant to say it. The words sat in the air of the early office without anywhere to go, and he let them. Copper didn't say anything either. They stayed like that for a while, the two of them, while the light came up over the mountains and the lake went silver and the day started. As it always did, without asking anyone's permission. The splint came off on a Thursday, 12 days before Christmas. Simone at the animal hospital stood back and watched Copper take 3 experimental steps across the tile floor, looking down at his leg with an expression of great scientific interest, and then break into an uneven but enthusiastic run toward the waiting area and a golden retriever who had been sitting patiently with his owner for the last 20 minutes. He's going to be fine, Simone said. I know, Lorne said. He watched Copper sit down in front of the golden retriever and begin immediately an extended conversation. The golden retriever appeared to listen. The owner, an older woman in a red coat who had the look of someone who had been coming to this animal hospital for 20 years, glanced up at Lorne. "Is he always like this?" she said. "Yes," Lorne said. She smiled. "My husband used to have a dog like that. Shepherd, too. He said the dog talked more sense than most people." She looked at Copper. He was right. Lorne paid the bill and carried Copper out to the truck, though Copper clearly felt this was no longer necessary and said so at some length during the short walk across the parking lot. On the drive back, the sea to sky was quiet, the way it went quiet in the week before Christmas when the early skiers had come and the real season hadn't started yet, and the mountain just sat there being itself. Snow on the peaks, the last of the late afternoon light on the water of Howe Sound far below. Lorne drove. Copper sat in the passenger seat without any blanket now, because he had apparently decided the period of requiring the blanket was behind him. He watched the road with the seriousness of someone who was paying attention to the route for future reference. Then he turned and looked at Lorne. "I see it," Lorne said. Copper continued to look at him. "The view. Yes, I see it." He did see it, in fact. He had not noticed the sound like that, the particular color of it, the way the last light caught the surface, in longer than he could have said. He wasn't sure what that meant, if it meant anything. He thought maybe Pauline would have said something about not overthinking it. She'd said that to him a lot. He thought about what he might say back to her this time. He hadn't found the answer by the time he pulled into the driveway on Alta Lake Road. He turned off the engine. The mountains were dark against the sky now, the snow still there on the peaks. Pauline's mountains exactly as they'd always been. Copper put his chin on Lorne's forearm. Lorne didn't move for a minute. Then he opened the door, and Copper jumped down, on all four legs, careful and deliberate, and walked toward the house. He stopped at the door and looked back over his shoulder with that expression of patient inquiry that Lorne was, somewhere between October and December, without making any announcement about it, beginning to know how to read. "I'm coming," Lorne meant to say. What he said instead was, "Okay." And it was close enough. Some things don't announce themselves. They just arrive. On four legs, through a drainage ditch, in the middle of a night that wasn't supposed to hold anything good. And they stay. Not because you asked them to, not because you were ready, but because somewhere in the long, quiet work of going on, something small and stubborn decided you were worth waiting for. And it turned out, in the end, that was exactly what you needed someone to decide.